with our regularly scheduled live stream of our Social Impact Career podcast. Today, we're delighted to have Dimitry Gershenson, who is the co-founder and CEO of Enduring Planet, which is one of the most innovative climate tech startups around. This podcast is supported by the Rotary Peace Fellowship, which is one of the world's most inspiring opportunities for professionals seeking a full master's degree or professional certificate program. Applications open February 1st. We'll share the link for that. And also, please check out PCDN and our career campus. We've got lots of exciting stuff going on. This session is streamed to LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. You're welcome to put in your questions and comments into the LinkedIn chat. And then in about 2 weeks, we'll convert this to one of our episodes of our podcast. And please go to PCDN Global, click on podcast, and you can access up to 100 other episodes with innovators, founders, change makers from all parts of the world. I think from anything from reducing gender-based violence to impact investing to engineering for change from about 20 to 30 countries. So Dimitry, if I read his bio, we'd be here for quite a while, so I will just summarize it quickly. He is the co-founder and CEO of Enduring Planet, which is working at the intersection of finance and social impact and climate change. He has over a decade of experience working on climate and impact investing, partnering with, investing in startups, funds, and nonprofits across the US, Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Prior to Enduring Planet, he led merger and acquisitions and served as the chief operating officer for Rango Wireless, an Enduring Ventures portfolio company. Before that, he worked at Meta's Energy Access Program, a $15 million plus investing initiative that helped enable energy access for 3 million people around the globe. He also worked on machine learning and all sorts of interesting products in the clean tech space at Meta, and has worked on building corporate accelerator programs for impact startups in India and Puerto Rico. He has an MSc from UC Berkeley, a BS in natural resource management from Rutgers. He lives in Portland with his wife, his daughter, and his bird. I'll have to ask the name of the bird. And he is also a former Peace Corps, a returned Peace Corps volunteer from Honduras. So Dimitry, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share some of your insights. And to start off with Catalina, and Catalina was scheduled to join us. We had some last minute sound problems. But just to start off, what is your why? So why do you do what you do?
Oh man, it's a deep question. I think my why kind of changes as I progress through my career. I have historically always gravitated towards the broad context of impact. I think that was something instilled in me by my family of like being a good citizen. But when I first got out of school, my why was trying to save the planet. And then I realized pretty quickly that on a planetary timescale, no amount of harm that we could do would really matter. Like in a billion years, everything will be fine again. And so, but we won't be, right? And so the why changed to really focusing on marginalized populations in developing countries. And so I spent a bunch of time working in energy access and thinking about sort of public health, access to electricity, access to economic opportunity in emerging markets. And then when I had my kid and sort of the ability to travel and gallivant internationally went away, it became a lot more difficult. Then the why sort of changed, and my focus really gravitated towards here in the US and driving meaningful action on climate change. I think right now my biggest motivator is just that the world is on fire, and there won't be much left for us if we don't take everything we have and throw it at this problem. And so that's what we do, and that's what a lot of our peers do in the industry, and that's what I would encourage anyone listening to do is like, if you haven't figured out your path yet, then I'd go work on climate, because there's probably never been a bigger existential threat to our entire existence than where we sit today.
Thank you so much. And please let us know in the LinkedIn chat where you're watching or joining us from, and feel free to start putting your questions. We have Nozuko from South Africa, and let us know Colombia, Portland, and let us know where else you're watching from. So the planet is on fire, and obviously I was having a chat with social impact colleagues from around the world this morning from the Amani Institute, which is a partner of ours. And again, we were hoping that there is a sustainable planet for our children's future. We have an 11-year-old. And so what are the kind of set of, look, first can you describe a little bit what Enduring Planet does? So what challenge are you trying to address? And how are you trying to scale to meet that challenge?
So if you think about climate as a sort of global problem, there's lots of things required to address it. There's deployment of existing technology, there's development of new technology, there's better policy, there's social action. And one of the main levers that remains kind of underdeveloped is capital. So we need about 5 trillion a year in investment in order to keep us to 2 degrees C, which is the kind of global consensus level of warming that we're willing to accommodate. That won't be as destructive as it can be. But in order, so if we want to get to 2 degrees, we need 5 trillion a year. Right now, we're investing about 600 billion a year, so it's about a tenth of where we need to be. And in particular, one of the areas that's underdeveloped is the credit market for climate. So the availability of debt capital for entrepreneurs to grow their businesses. And we need about 700 billion a year of that. And today we get about like an eighth or something. And it's reserved largely for very late stage companies. And so we provide very quick, very simple, very founder friendly capital to earlier stage startups and small businesses in climate so that they can grow faster, so that they can bring solutions to the market faster. So that's what we do. And the things that we need to scale are more capital to put to work, and also to build better tools to automate as much of the process as possible so that we can put money in the hands of entrepreneurs faster. And so we've already started on that journey. We've got quite a bit of automation already developed, but the goal is to go from a 30-day process where we get an application, issue a term sheet in a week, fund in 30 days. We want to compress that to like 48 hours. And so I think from an impact perspective, a lot of folks say, well, that's not, you're not doing the real work. Like the companies are doing the real work. And that's true, but they couldn't do that work without the capital. And so we play a really powerful enabling role, and our money ends up doing work multiple times over because often we are lending on fairly long cycles, so called 2 years. Whereas these companies are turning that money into real revenue very quickly. And so they can then recycle that capital and continue to put it to work, buying inventory, spending it on marketing, you name it.
Great to see so many people from around the world. So welcome Andre from Poland, Rachel from Germany, Lakshmi from India, David from Uganda, Sarah from Dubai, Sade from Ethiopia. So hopefully we have some other people from Latin America. So just to sum up, so basically what Enduring Planet is doing is trying to radically increase access to capital for innovative climate startups, not on an equity perspective, but a revenue-based financing so that they can grow their businesses in a much more rapid manner to help address some of the key climate challenges facing the world. And you're trying to use the best of machine learning, AI, and other tools to make it as efficient and rapid as possible. So, and we have people from Montenegro. Great to see you, Natalia. Abumala from London. So the next question is more on the career path. So what are some of the unique skills and experiences that you think have helped you to build this career path, going from Peace Corps to working in energy and kind of agriculture, to working at Meta, to working on microgrids, now to helping to basically help finance raise the revenue of financing to accelerate climate tech startups. So what are your skills that you've developed, and what do you recommend other people do to work at this intersection of climate and finance?
So I've had a very non-traditional path towards a career in finance. I still don't even know if I really have a career in finance. I would consider myself more of an operator. My co-founder is really the finance brain behind our business. She has, an MBA. She started a debt fund before this one. They raised close to $200 million to do clean tech investing all over the emerging, sort of like sub-Saharan Africa, India, and Pakistan. But in my case, I think I have a number of skills that I've developed that help me do what I do today. So one is like an understanding of the space. So I've got quite a bit of education in climate and natural resource management and ecology. I spent a long time working in emerging markets where there's a lot of complexity around these issues, and so it helped me understand how these systems kind of fit together, how capital, policy, technology all blend, and what are the drivers that sort of unlock action in any given vertical. Working at a place like Facebook or Meta gave me a lot of understanding of what's good process in like a corporate setting. It also gave me a lot of insight into what make for good corporate values or a lack thereof. And so I think that inspired me a lot as a leader to build a company that makes different choices. Obviously I've had to also do quite a lot of work that's sort of finance related. So I did M&A work during Ventures. We did a lot of investing out of the Facebook program. And so I had to learn how to evaluate an opportunity, really due diligence, understand financial models, understand projections, understand risk. I think in the end, any investing work is really about building a clear picture of what is the opportunity and what are the risks to that opportunity. And so the best investors are very savvy around both sides of the equation and can balance that like opportunity to risk equation. I think a lot of folks gravitate towards MBAs when they want to work in finance. I think it's kind of a shortcut, but it's a very expensive shortcut. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to build a career in, call it impact investing or social finance, that does not require an MBA. You have to be very intentional about it, and you have to sort of chart a path that gives you the same skill set that an MBA would. In my case, I got most of that while working in Enduring Ventures because I basically got thrown into a very deep pool and was told like swim or get out. It was great. It was like a very fascinating experience. So I think, if somebody looks at my resume, they probably wouldn't say I'm a finance person, but I don't even know if I consider myself a finance person, but I sure as hell do play in finance.
Wonderful. Welcome, Daluda from Ivory Coast. We really have a lot of the world. So thank you everyone for joining. Please feel free to start putting in your questions and let us know if you're joining where you're watching from. So, you talked about kind of being thrown into the pool of doing all this incredible, one, you built a lot of skills at Facebook, your undergraduate and graduate degree, working also at Enduring Ventures, which kind of helped incubate Enduring Planet. So people are thinking about like this, maybe they don't know much about kind of startup operations, or they don't know much about finance. You said an MBA could be a very expensive route to develop those skills. Like you could be intentional and do it other ways. What skills would you encourage for someone who maybe doesn't have a finance background? They want to start working at this intersection of money and sustainability. What are some key skills that you suggest people develop to be competitive, and what are, an MBA is one way, but what other pathways would you suggest people might consider to, is it financial literacy, is understanding markets, is it understanding climate tech, is it like, what's the best ways to develop those skills?
So I think there's a few things you can do. One is obviously if you want to work in climate, you have to do your homework and understand the problem and understand the solutions that are available in space and how they relate. It's actually, I think, becoming easier and easier to build call it a 10,000 foot view of the space, either through fellowships like Terra.do or Climate Base. There's a few of these programs that have sort of like learned very quickly about climate tech. There's also quite a lot of resources online, sort of like online courses that you can take on Coursera or wherever, where you can get a basic understanding of what's going on in the world. I think on the finance side, I think you can take also classes. I would say it's probably better to learn it by doing. And so find a place where you can get a job that is related to the work that you do today. wherever you're doing. Let's say you are in marketing or communications. Let's say you're in sales. Let's say you're in, I don't know, project management, right? And start to shift your role within that organization to have more and more financial analysis as part of your core day-to-day, right? So build a budget, start to understand how the company's cash flow goes through the business. Try to understand, like, start looking at, getting involved in bookkeeping or accounting. Like, I think in my case, I sort of approached this problem from an academic perspective initially. So when I was at Berkeley, I was working in South Sudan. I was going to do a master's thesis on sort of development of clean energy systems in South Sudan. And then the country fell into a civil war, and I had 4 months to figure out a master's, or I would have to spend another year doing the master's. And I had randomly connected with this group called Cross Boundary that works all over Africa to finance microgrid projects. And we ended up writing a piece together on how to basically create flows of capital to small microgrid projects around the world, which are really difficult to finance. And I had no finance background at the time. And so I spent 4 months like taking weekend classes and reading about project finance and learning about risk and blah, blah, blah. And then when I joined Facebook, we were trying to figure out what do we do in energy access. And one of the biggest gaps that we saw in the market was catalytic capital. And so we said, okay, well, we'll play that role. How do we learn how to play that role? And so I had to teach myself on the job. And I think in the social impact space, if you work in a startup, if you work in a nonprofit, if you work in a foundation, if you find a values aligned organization, you can generally shift towards some kind of financial role if that's where you want to be, and build a skill set and then jump to the next level from there.
I'll ask one more question. I have lots of questions coming in, so I'll just do one more quick one. So Catalina, we do angel investing for social impact, and I critique the market a lot, but she sometimes says I've drank too much Kool-Aid from the market, and she's much more critical. And so, the funding gap that there's we're doing whatever, 600 billion a year, we need 5 trillion to try to get to hold under 2 degrees global warming. Or, there's also estimates for the SDGs. We're spending about 200 billion. We need 3 trillion a year. So what is your working for market-based solutions? Some people say capitalism cannot solve the problems that the system has helped create. And that what we need, if you read Winner Takes All, or a lot of the books critiquing the dominant, whether it's philanthropic capital, venture investing, that all this talk about sustainability in the end, so much of capitalism is about consuming and destroying the planet for short-term profit. So how do you deal with that kind of tension of that, there's so much capital in the world, and we could address a lot of our problems if we did better public policy and better investing. And so how do you kind of deal with that tension of capital both could potentially address a lot of these challenges, but it's also fundamentally at the root?
Okay, so this is we could do a whole podcast on just this question. I would sort of think about it. I think about it this way. So I lean very far left. If I worked alongside my political alignment, I wouldn't have the job that I have today. But the unfortunate reality is that the climate crisis is on a 10-year time scale at this point. We have a very compressed time frame in which we can act and have an impact before it's too late. Dismantling capitalism is not a 10-year play, right? Unfortunately, we have incredibly entrenched systems and interests with more power than the other side that have sort of incentives to keep the system in place. Now, those interests are not immune to gradual shifts in action, and this is where regulatory and consumer behavior, I think, can play a role. I think also, fortunately for climate, the world is now on fire enough that you kind of can't not act, right? Whether it will be enough is a different question, but I think it's kind of like an and, not an either or, right? Mm-hmm. there are people who need to fight for dismantling capitalism because obviously it's an extractive, like, broken system. And maybe there is some future where we have some model that balances wealth creation with inclusion, equity, and like non-extractive practices. I'm not sure it's possible, right? And so in the interim, like, we got to put out the fire. Like, yes, maybe, I don't know, to use an analogy, like, maybe I'll stop there.
Yeah, it's a hard question.
Well, I have this conversation all the time with people. And on the one hand, I want to be like, totally, let's just burn it all down and start again. But on the other hand, like, it's not going to happen. Like, as much as I want it to happen, as much as other people want it to happen, it's not going to happen. Not on a timeline that works for the people who are truly going to suffer as a result of this crisis. And so we can all say, like, yeah, like, let's just like not consume. And it's like, okay, well, what's the alternative system that you have in place today that people can shift to that will work for the poor, it will work for the middle class, and it will work on a time scale that actually allows us to transition. And I don't see it. So it's hard. It's like, it's a hard thing to grapple with because it is true, right? Like, the reason we're here is because of capitalism.
So I'll just make one quick comment, then we'll go to the questions. So I've taught for many years in business and social change. And, for the first few years I taught it, it was in a master's in conflict resolution at Georgetown. The first few years I taught that class, it was like interesting. But people were like, no, I want to go work for the NGOs or the IGOs or the multilaterals. And then eventually people started to come in and say they were already working on these issues or going to work for the horrible oil companies or the impact investors. And I particularly getting, everyone has to find their own path, whether they want to work in the system, advocate for change, or to like challenge the system. But I think often people can have a huge impact when they enter the system, whatever that means, and try to advance radical change from within. So, I mean, that's one of the big questions around careers. Like, do you try to change the system within? Do you advocate without? Do you go for policy? Do you go for finance? But let's bring in the questions. So the first one is from Bibola. I think she's based in London. She would like to do a career change into the green economy as relating to health and well-being. And she added a second part to her question. So how did she get started, particularly around sustainability? And basically, if someone wants to start, there's so many aspects to working around sustainability and climate change, whether it's water access, sustainable energy, health, agriculture. But what are some suggestions you have? I guess, how does someone find the path within kind of sustainability in general? Because there's so many options.
I would probably frame the question in a different way, or maybe I would think about the problem in a different way, right? There's every kind of job in sustainability. You can do communications in sustainability. You can do bookkeeping, accounting, design, sales, marketing, analysis, consulting, like, you name it, every job exists in climate. So it's more of a question of like, how committed are you to this problem, and what are the tools that you have that allow you to work in the specialty that you actually have today. So if you're just going to school, you can study anything and apply it to climate. You love telling stories, like, great, go into marketing and comms. You like convincing people to do stuff, go into sales or business development. You like building stuff, be an engineer, whatever it is, right? Be a physicist, a biologist, a chemist, it doesn't really matter. All of those things you can do in climate. And so I think often people are like, well, I want to work in climate, I need to go study climate. That is not true, right? In fact, most jobs in climate today require no understanding of the problem. They just require you to be able to do the job. People who install solar don't have master's degrees in climate. Generally, they might, but like, they just go do the job, right? And they're good at doing the job. And so I would sort of think about it that way. There's now a lot of resources that are emerging to allow people to transition into the climate startup community. Again, like Climate Base, Climate Tech BC, Work on Climate, My Climate Journey, like all of these places where there are job boards and sort of recruiting opportunities. But that's just climate tech. That's not all of climate. right? So you should decide like what excites you in the space. Is it agriculture and climate? Is it water and climate? Is it renewable energy and climate? Is it recruiting and climate? And like look for that. And obviously, not everyone can make those choices. And I say this fully aware of the privilege with which I was able to make the choices that I made. But I think that fortunately for us, the growth of the sector is enabling opportunity for so many people to apply their supposedly unrelated skill set to the climate challenge.
So there's actually another question from Rachel, which this was not planned. She's a qualified management accountant working on modeling, and she stays for bookkeepers, but not as much, on kind of the finance end. I'm gonna see if we can find the second part to her question. But so basically what you're saying, do you have any advice for someone who's got the finance, like accounting experience, where to look for opportunities around climate tech or sustainability jobs?
So, Rachel, I would recommend you check out some of the larger sort of job posting sites like Climate Base or Climate Tech BC or Work on Climate. I regularly see opportunities for financial planning and analysis, project finance roles. There's also a lot of operating roles where you need to sort of build models and understand budget, where these types of skills can apply. If you have experience in large IT projects, then that experience is very transferable to large renewable energy, storage, and other projects. I feel like there's like more specific resources I could point to, but I would say that there's definitely a lot of opportunity out there.
Okay. And I do want to emphasize Dimitri's point that thinking about your unique skill set, whether it's graphic design, communications, finance, marketing, and then looking how your skills connect to the job market can be often the best way, rather than kind of going for a particular training. And there was a really interesting report that came out for RippleWorks, which is a great kind of McKinsey for social impact from 2016 about the talent deficit in social enterprise, and also what prevents social enterprises from growing. And the assumption a lot of times it's financing. One of the things they said, the talent deficit is often on sales and marketing and communications. So it's not, and so that's one of the things, if you're good at operations, like whatever your skill set is, and think about where the growth is. So the next question comes from Natalia, who's currently based in Montenegro. Have you seen companies use the flourishing business model canvas to build environmental and social values into their very operations?
I think I understand this question.
Or also our second part, just in case. So she also said, what prompts investors to look purely beyond the economics of return on investment?
Yeah, so look, there's an incredible amount of work that happens across capitalism to add social, environmental, and governance sort of ideas into the business. It is generally driven by profit motive. Sometimes it's not. And in those cases, companies will have often a different structure. So there'll be public benefit corporations, they'll have a B Corp certification. But you look at like a company like Google or Microsoft, the reason they do social impact work is because it has a brand benefit, right? And it drives other value for them. It might be policy value, it might be communications value, it might be customer value, like whatever it is, it's all justified in the context of return on investment. There is an expanding field, like quite a lot of capital moving into social entrepreneurship, where investors are specifically looking for impact returns as well as capital returns. Compared to the total flows of capital into entrepreneurship, it is a sliver, but is pretty dramatically growing over time. And I think, if you look at climate, for example, most of the investors in climate who are specialists in climate require some monitoring of climate impact. And then there's, I would say, an expanding community of venture capitalists who invest for financial returns, but have like a values baseline. So like Obvious Ventures is a really good example. They have like a world positive term sheet that every investment of theirs needs to sign. And all of their companies exist to like better humanity, but they're not investing for some measured social impact. They're investing for return.
So shared, B-Works is the global job board for B corporations. So if you think about triple bottom line, people, planet, profit, I'm on the advisory board of a B Corp tech change, and that's a good place to look for kind of those type of opportunities. Most B Corps tend to be small, under 50 people, but there's a couple of larger ones. So just two comments from Sherry, who's a principal at DRG Talent. She's mentioning Ceres, which is a great organization that's been working on these issues for a long time. And she said she's recruiting for full positions. And then she asked a specific question, and do check out DR Challenge. There's one of the places also find more senior level climate and sustainability jobs is the social impact recruiters. Sequoia Leadership, DRG, Prospectus, and others. So she's asking, do you know anything about the National Green Bank and how it's being set up? I haven't heard of it. I don't know if you have any specific.
So there are state green bank programs all over the United States. There's, I think, as part of the IRA, there's like additional national level support. This is capital that's meant to enable projects that are often serving underrepresented communities, marginalized communities. They're like closing gaps. So like low income residential solar, community solar projects for multi-unit housing, that kind of stuff. I'm familiar with like New York's and Washington, D.C.'s green bank programs. A lot of those folks are often hiring and looking for people to fill, especially junior analyst positions. So those are great opportunities for folks based in the U.S. I think internationally, a lot of the impact finance roles are in multilateral institutions, sort of development institutions, development finance opportunities. Those are often really good. And now there's private foundations and public foundations are starting to do more social impact investing work. So those are also opportunities for international. Anyway, yeah, sorry, that's a little off track.
Oh, no, not at all. So we have about 7 more minutes. I'll bring in a bunch more questions, but just one comment. Increasingly, if you have any excess capital of your own, whether it's $1 or 1,000 euros, wherever you choose to park your money is so important. And a report came out recently talking that with some of the biggest, tech companies, the huge amount of capital they have sitting around is just sitting in banks is actually contributing because those banks are lending to climate destructive projects. So you should always try to look at your bank and look for banks that are B Corp, like Amalgamated Bank or this First Sunshine Bank. Do some research, whether it's investing stocks, bonds, or banks. Like look at where your money sits, whether it's for your company or for your individual stuff. So next question comes from Ethiopia, from Sade. My background is in sociology, worked in humanitarian issues. This is more like a developing question. She's asking, is there any demand for skills? So I don't know if this is specific to sustainability, but if you have any quick reactions.
Totally. My answer's always yes, right? It really depends on the work that you do in these settings. I think historically people have thought about their work being tied to a field, right? Like I used to think I work in energy access. I was an operator. I was a person who got shit done in that setting. And there was some narrow band in which I got stuff done. And so I would instead reframe how you think about your contribution to an organization and then say, okay, how can I apply those skills in a setting that matters to me? And so I'm going to just guess, right? So that today, was working with humanitarian organizations doing project management. Okay, cool. Well, then you're an effective project manager. Well, what did you do as part of project management? You did negotiations, you tracked projects, you held teams accountable. Think about what those skills are and then find roles that demand that same balance of skills to work in a space that matters to you. There's a ton of opportunity.
Okay. So the next question comes from David Ojara. So this is specific to Enduring Planet. So can you talk a little about if someone is involved in a climate tech startup or knows somebody, a little bit about what you look for and maybe an example of the company that you've helped do some revenue-based financing that you're most excited about so far?
Sure. So we invest today only in the United States. We will be international sooner rather than later, but for now we have plenty of demand here. Our first product is a revenue-based financing product, and that means that we need to see initial revenue in order for us to fund. Our funding requirements are actually open and public on the website, so you can just go and look and see if you're eligible. We will be launching another product this fall that will serve pre-revenue companies, and so once that's live, people will see the requirements for that as well. That's basically it.
And then can you talk about is Enduring Planet when you've hired, or do you have any openings? Just we always like to talk about the hiring process.
Oh, sure.
So, like, do you anticipate having any openings? And when you've had openings, just, how competitive is the application pool? And are you requiring people to be in person, or are you open to remote US? Or?
Yeah, so we have a kind of a funky model. We are a global company. We have team members in the US, in Pakistan, and in Eastern Europe. But we tend to hire for specific skills in specific markets, even though the work is actually remote, because it makes it easier with time zones and management. And so we have an opening right now for sort of an analyst position in Pakistan. We're interviewing for it now. It's been like shared on, we're looking for a very specific skill set. We want folks with CFA charter, and so we market it through those channels. But if anybody's interested, they can send me a message on LinkedIn. I'm happy to take a look. We want people who have experience with financial analysis, particularly in the credit space. We will be hiring later this year once we close a round of financing, and so we post all of our jobs openly on Twitter and LinkedIn, and so happy to please give us a follow on either platform, and then you'll see them pop up. We'll be hiring folks in marketing, in portfolio management, in credit, growth, etc. So keep an eye out.
So there's about 2 or 3 more questions. So one question just for me, for people who think they have an itch to build a startup, or whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit, because you've been both part of large tech companies, small firms, and now actively building an incredible startup. What is your advice? How crazy does someone have to be to build a startup? Or your advice for if your idea is that product market fit, or just because it's kind of idealized, I'll go out and build a startup, but there's a lot of challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think 99% of people who start building a startup probably shouldn't. And that's okay. It's something that everybody has to learn for themselves. I would probably recommend working at a startup first before you decide to start one yourself. It helps to give you a sense of what the dynamic is like. It also gives you a sense of what kind of company you'd want to build if you were to do it yourself. It helped me a lot to have worked in lots of different settings to then understand the type of business that I wanted to build. Because a lot of the mistakes that folks make early on stem from a lack of previous experience. And so it's interesting because often people think that there's ageism in startups, which is kind of true. Investors, if you look at how they invest, if you're over 40, it's harder to raise venture capital. But the most successful companies are for our founders over 35. And so if you're young and you have a ton of resources and you're not worried about failing, go start a company, learn it the hard way, right? If you don't have a ton of resources like me, I wouldn't have been able to start my company without starting it out of the venture studio, because they were able to pay me, have healthcare for my kid and stuff. There aren't enough venture studios for everybody to get that kind of support and very competitive models. And so I would say if your goal is to build a company, find a lower risk way to learn about what it's like to build a company, see the types of mistakes that leaders make, and then go build a company. Because you will shed all of the stuff that will likely break you in the first year, and you can just get moving. And there's obviously accelerator and incubator programs you can join that will help you. But frankly, in my experience, accelerator programs aren't run by former entrepreneurs in general. And so a lot of the things that you really need to learn they're hard to learn in those settings. There's nothing wrong with them. They bring a lot of value, but I think like, yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
I shared, you mentioned Venture Studios. There is the Global Startup Studio Network. The link is there, GSSN. And for people who have a focus on sustainability, I think the final deadline is tomorrow. Zinc Ventures, which is based out of London. They take applicants from all over the world to sponsor visas, and I'll put the link in. I think, you go to London for 12 months, they provide you some seed funding, and then you hang out with 70 other people from all different sectors, and you kind of create companies together. And every year they have a different theme. So this year it's on sustainability. So I'll put the link on LinkedIn, so please check that out. So I think the last question from a attendee comes back from Natalia. So there's a lot of talk about crypto and all the different crypto coins. And I think Algorand is probably the most sustainable crypto. But are there any climate finance opportunities that that are connected to crypto that you would recommend checking out? Or are you guys doing anything? Are you looking at integrating crypto?
Yeah. So I'm probably the worst person to ask this question. I'm like a big Web3 skeptic. I think a lot of the folks playing in the regen space or the Web3 climate space are hammers looking for nails. So I would say if you want to work at the intersection of crypto and climate, then I would encourage you to approach the problem from the perspective of like, what is the key thing that I'm actually trying to solve? And why is crypto, why is Web3 the solution here? Because it often isn't. And so if you approach it with I'm going to solve problems with Web3, there's lots of things that you can do wrong. The folks that I've seen approach the problem thoughtfully, so Toucan Protocol is one. Audible is another. There are folks who are leveraging Web3 tech to solve problems for which Web3 was really designed, right? So this is trust issues, transaction simplification, where decentralization of database management actually makes sense. And that's the kind of stuff that I would look for. We've looked at a couple Web3 type deals. We haven't done one today, partially because often they're sort of marketplace driven or token driven, and the economics just don't work for revenue-based financing. We may eventually start doing more transactions in the space, but it's just so volatile. And a lot of folks decide to go towards some kind of token trading. And I don't know why that's what everybody wants to do. It's let's put it on NFT, let's mint it, let's put it on chain. And it's well, why? What are you actually solving with that?
Thank you so much. I just put in there, a friend of mine is the founder of ePioneers, which is doing some really fascinating stuff around sustainability, NFTs, and crypto. And they're running on Algorand, and they've gotten all sorts of awards. So I think it's one of the most interesting, and they're based in Colombia, Brazil, UK. So I just encourage people to check that one out. And just my last question before we wrap up, I want to be respectful of time. Where do you find the most interesting, two questions. What are you working on upskilling right now? Or could it be, what are you doing for fun? And then where do you go to kind of find, because there's so much depressing news about the climate. So where do you go to find things that keep you optimistic or hopeful, that are not climate washing, but that genuinely give you optimism about the future?
So I have optimism about the future because I don't feel like I have a choice to not. I think this is something that happens to a lot of folks in the climate space, which is that over time you learn enough about the problem and you kind of have an internal choice to make. One is you give up, and two is you have hope. There's no middle ground, because otherwise it's just so much, right? And so I have to have hope for my kid, for my family, for my friends, for this planet, because if I don't, then I'm just going to give up. Having said that, my work gives me incredible optimism, because every single day we see people who are committed to solving this problem or solving their piece of this problem, and they're building solutions that I would have never thought of. And it just gives me so much excitement and hope. It's still not enough, but it's like changing this downward trajectory ever slowly to get to somewhere that might actually be okay. In terms of like upskilling, I think most of my self-improvement that's not directly driven by like the work that I do, right? Like, I'm better at reading P&Ls now than I was a year ago. I'm better at understanding financial models. I'm better at whatever. Like a lot of it comes from just trying to be a kinder person. And I spend a lot of time doing this with my kid because we're trying to encourage her to be a really kind person. And what's fascinating is that it then bleeds into my professional life, because the work that I do to understand, my biases, the work that I do to understand my role in the world, the work I understand, I do to like be a better friend and ally, it then shapes how I think about our investing and shapes how I think about team management. We had an intern for the summer, and she's incredible. I'm not going to name anyone because I don't want to blow up anybody's spot, but just amazing. And we had this group meeting talking about diversity and inclusion, and she said, look, like, I'm an intern here, and from the first day that I was here, I was never made to feel like an intern. I was always made to feel like someone whose opinion truly mattered, and someone who could have real impact and who could participate wholly and not have this like I'm of other, in a way that like I've never felt before in any other job. And a lot of that I think was driven by the fact that like I try to do the same with everybody I interact with. Like just because I'm the CEO doesn't mean that like my opinion matters more. So that's where I spend a lot of my time. It's like thinking about how to just like be good. It's actually really hard.
So I think we'll end there, but thank you so much, Dimitry, for sharing your time. Other questions came in, but you could take a look at LinkedIn, and our next live stream of the podcast will be September 27th with Alex Budek, who just came out with a book on change making, also teaches at UC Berkeley. So there's a Berkeley connection here, and we do this twice a month. And I also wanted to make a plug for Carbon Collective. So if you're an individual investor or you have a small startup or company or nonprofit, and you want to think about how to move your money to the best robo-advisor for sustainability, I would recommend checking them out or message me, because it's amazing. And right now it's only US based. And Dimitry, thank you so much for the work that you do, for generously sharing your time and energy. And as a parent of an 11-year-old, actually, I hope that I'm reasonably optimistic, but also not delusional, because that there will be a better sustainable future for not just a small elite of people who can afford it. And actually, last question, I forgot to ask the name of your bird, and what is your bird before we end? And do you bring your bird into podcasts or anything? And
I know I'm sad that I didn't do this from home so that I could show her off. So we have an eclectus parrot. It's a parrot species from the Solomon Islands, and her name is Bowie, like David Bowie.
Okay, very cool. So thank you so much, everyone. Please follow Enduring Planet on LinkedIn, Twitter, connect with Dimitry. And again, if you know of interesting startups in the US that are doing climate tech, that there's always an assumption like getting investment means success. No, the best form of success, whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit, is generating sustainable revenue and impact. And there needs to be much more revenue-based financing rather than just always thinking about investing to please the investors, because we need to have a sustainable plan. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you everyone for watching from around the world. And one person asked the resources that were mentioned, where they can find them. So this is all in the LinkedIn chat. So you can look back at this. And again, this will be converted to the podcast in about 2 weeks. And again, thank you to Rotary for sponsoring this. Please check out the Rotary Peace Fellowship, and have a wonderful day, everyone.